Hey guys, it's Legitimate and welcome back to another Call of War video. This is another episode of the Doctrine series where we review doctrines, their strengths and weaknesses, and what you could use each doctrine for. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the Allied Doctrine. Now, in my opinion, the Allied Doctrine is a super solid and strong doctrine that is capable of winning games super easily, especially in 100-player maps. So it has a 30% reduced production time, 25% reduced research cost and time, and a 20% reduced upgrade cost and time, but it has a minus 10% movement speed. Now, this isn't that big of a bad thing. The Axis debuff and the Commander debuff are much worse than the Allied debuff. The Allied does have some weaknesses, the main one being its unit buffs are not very good. We'll go into that in a sec. But I just want to say that these buffs are really OP. Like, in the end game, when you have a good economy and you don't have to worry about resources because you're making thousands of it per hour, you can spam stuff super easily as the Allied Doctrine, and you can research super high level stuff in mid game and early game. So it's a really powerful doctrine despite its bad reputation among beginners. If you're a beginner, you might think this is really bad, but if you're experienced and you know what you're doing, this thing is OP. It is the most powerful doctrine in the end game and mid game, and it is the only weakness is its early game when it has that bad movement speed. So infantry has no buffs except for the actually it does have two buffs, but in the three main infantry units that you will be using, there is no buffs. As you can see, no militia buffs, no infantry buff, and even a slight motorized infantry debuff, which is really not good. It's not a very good doctrine for allied for infantry units. It does have a common turn buff that's not that great. Commandos buff, it's not that great, and it does have a little bit of a paratrooper buff. So I guess that's fine. In the ordnance, no artillery buff, no anti-tank buff, no anti-air buff, but there is an SP artillery buff, and this is really good because as an allied doctrine, you're gonna be using SP artillery. Like, no matter what, you're gonna be using it. You have to. If you don't, you're just gonna get destroyed by enemy units, and you're gonna need it anyways because you don't have a lot of other good buffs. So, like, this is probably your second best buff, and I'll show you what the first one is. But this is probably your second best buff, so you're gonna need to use this. You're gonna need to build Ordnance Foundry. This is why, and you know, because you have that less movement speed, you're gonna need SP artillery rather than artillery because this will just be too slow for you. In the tanks, everything is not very good except the tank destroyer, which really sucks because the tank destroyer really isn't that great. It's not a very good unit at all. I mean, it's faster and it's cheaper, but seriously, I don't recommend it. The rest of the tanks, all four of these units, armored units, suck as an allied because you get these later. Even though you can research faster, you get these later. Heavies is probably your best bet if you're an allied, and armored cars. These two are your best bet. These two should be avoided, but if you want to use them, you can. It doesn't really matter. Now, the best buff as an allied doctrine is by far, alright, by far, the tactical bomber. This thing is OP. Now, the top one, the first buff is not very good. Like, damage versus a light armor. Not very good because, you know, you're not supposed to use attacks against light armor. You're supposed to be using attack bombers because they deal more damage. However, 15% attack range. That is just OP. OP, I tell you. OP. If you have max level attacks as an allied player, you can attack at such a far range. I don't know what the maximum is, but you can attack at such a far range, and it's stupidly powerful. And you get it earlier, so you want tactical bombers as an allied player. You need this, you want this, alright? Strategic bomber I don't barely use, but I guess it's pretty good because you gotta get the bomb even further. Destroyer buff is a pretty good buff. Like, this is a pretty good buff. This is an important unit that you need for naval defense. So it's a pretty important buff. So you do get some important buffs. You get a good naval buff, you get a good air power buff, and you get a good land buff. So I guess the Allied is a very solid doctrine when it comes to unit buffs, although it does miss out on one of the most important ones, like the interceptor, and especially the tanks. This is why the Allied to beginners aren't very good. because it has no infantry or tank buffs, like barely any infantry tank buffs, so it's not very good for a beginner. But if you're an experienced player and you start using air power and you start using ordnance rather than just tanks and infantry, then it's a really powerful doctrine because of just how fast you can spam things. In the secret section, there's no buffs for rocket artillery and railroad guns or rockets, but there's a buff for nuclears, which I guess is pretty good. You could use nuclears earlier, which is, I guess, a little bit of a buff. Not really. Just 2 days earlier, that's it. So overall, the Allied Doctrine is a pretty solid doctrine, in my opinion. Strategies you can use at it. In the early game, like when I'm talking about day 1 to 4, just spam infantry, motorized infantry, and artillery for now. Be solid. And spend all your rear, oil, and metal, all of it, on industry. And what the industry you want to build up is actually not goods and food. It's actually rear oil, rear oil, metal. And then you want to build up goods. You don't really need a lot of food because food is mainly used for infantry and naval units. Although you'll be building some naval units, you won't be building a lot of infantry, especially in mid-game and end-game. So early game, you're going to be building infantry because you need infantry. You want to save up that rear to build up your industry. In the beginning, just build interceptors, don't build tanks yet, because tanks are for later. So that's why Allied Doctrine is a little bit hard, because you need to survive early game, and early game is not very easy to survive as an Allied Doctrine, especially when you're going against Axis players who will be sniffing you out because you're going to be OP later on. Destroyers, put out a couple of those. Submarines, your choice really. In terms of air power, early game when they went to 4, just build interceptors, don't build tanks yet. Spend most of your metal, rear, and oil on industry, and the industry you're building up, remember, is metal, rear, and oil. Start spamming some artillery and infantry. These 2 units are going to be the core of your army in the beginning of the game. Then start transitioning into units that start using oil. This includes motorized infantry, SP artillery, a couple tanks, some lights, some mediums, some heavies, and then especially the tactical bomber. You're going to start spamming these things out once you have the base ready. So day 1, for the first week, from day 1 to 7, you're building up your industry for rear and oil. You're building up those aircraft factories to max, like level 3 maybe. And then you're researching tactical bombers. You're not building them, you're just researching them. And then the moment it turns into day 7, the moment you have everything ready, you can spam it because you're going to get lots of rear, you're going to get lots of oil, there's no resource deficit, you're going to have those high-level aircraft factories, and you're going to have those high-level tactical bombers, and you're going to be starting to spam out level 3 or level 4 tactical bombers at incredible high speed, and there's absolutely nothing your opponent can do because you have all of that already. So, that is a plan. The tactical bomber is the core, the horsepower of your army. You need to spam this, but in the early game, this is why Allied Doctrine is a little bit hard. In the early game, you cannot spam this because it's too expensive. You'll only be able to build a few, and you'll be unable to build a lot of artillery because you're using up the goods on that. And all you'll be able to build is infantry and tactical bombers. You're not gonna have a good industry. You're not gonna have a good economy, and so it's not a very good strategy if you're gonna do it that way. But if you do the way I tell you to do, this is probably the best strategy in all of my games that I've played so far. Obviously, there's lots of different variations, but tactical bombers are the core of your army as an allied player. You're going to be using SP artillery at the same time. This is your main land unit by day 20 or 14, and your main naval unit is definitely going to be the destroyer and the cruiser. These 2 units combined will destroy pretty much anything. You do want some naval bombers. Naval bombers are pretty good. You do want those, but other than that, these 2 units combined can stop anything. Battleships are too slow, they cannot catch up, I think. So yeah, that's it for today's video. The Allied Doctrine, like I said, very solid doctrine, very powerful in the late game and mid game, but you need to know what you're doing in the early game and you need to survive. So, if you guys enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.